Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Cole. It's Sunday afternoon, September 7th. This will be the week 4 message for Constitutional Law, Political Science 3753 for the fall 2025 term. Okay, everybody. What we have on the syllabus this week is only one set of notes for Lecture 6. We're beginning to look at executive power. Now, later in the week on Thursday, we're going to have our second quiz. And this will deal with some material that's on the syllabus for next week, but we'll let you go ahead and take a look at it for the quiz later this week, and we'll talk a bit more about it in the class notes for next week. The two cases from the textbook you'll be looking at for the quiz, expect 5 items on each. The Korematsu case and the steel seizure case. Now, the Korematsu case, of course, is also known as the Japanese exclusion case. And the court went ahead and arguably reluctantly allowed this during World War II, the removal of people of Japanese descent from the West Coast. That eventually was overturned, we note in the class notes. That'll be in the notes for next week, in the recent case of Trump versus Hawaii. But at the time, with World War II still on, it was winding down actually, but the court allowed the Japanese exclusion policies in the Korematsu case. Now, the steel seizure case, we jump ahead to the Korean War. President Truman is in office. A labor dispute broke out in the steel industry, and President Truman was afraid this was going to interfere with the manufacture of war material for the Korean War effort. So he ordered the Secretary of Commerce to seize the steel mills. And you'll see what the Supreme Court decided about that. Okay, so those are two cases, and we'll talk more about those in the class notes next week. But we'll ask you to look at those two cases that take up 10 or 15 pages in the textbook, including all the commentary and the excerpts. Two cases, okay, expect 5 items each. In a quiz, you'll have 10 minutes to look at 10 true-false items, and that'll be available all day Thursday, this coming Thursday, the 11th. Okay, so that will be our second quiz. Notice, everybody, in each of those cases, you have a couple of opinions. I think you have 3 opinions for each of those cases. You have the majority opinion, and then in both those cases you have concurrences and or dissents provided for you there for each of those cases. So be sure you understand and that you've looked at all the opinions. Okay? So everybody, in the class notes for Lecture 6, which is all we have on the syllabus for this week other than the quiz, we're going to go on, we'll do 2 more sets of lecture notes next week on executive power, and then we'll be getting pretty close to the end of the material for the midterm exam after the first of the month. We've got to get through lecture 12, and we'll be through 7 and 8 next week. That's what's on the syllabus for next week. So anyway, starting out on executive power, we talk about Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. Teddy Roosevelt's theory was that practically everything was permitted to the president, except that which was specifically excluded or denied to him. Okay, whereas William Howard Taft apparently believed that the president had no power except that which was specifically laid out and given to him. Okay, so you can look at those as contrasting approaches to power, but arguably, if you read both of these people closely, the difference between them is not so wide. The modern presidency often is dated back to the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt, but you can trace it even further back to President Lincoln's actions during the Civil War, and we look at a couple of cases. In the prize cases of 1863, the Supreme Court decided that the Union, those are the United States forces, were indeed entitled to seize Confederate warships and take their contents as prizes of war. even though the Confederacy was not officially recognized as a belligerent. We were treating it as a rebellion rather than a war, technically speaking. But the majority of opinion states we're not going to feign ignorance of the greatest civil war the country has ever known and deny the federal government, the Union, the right to seize ships as prizes of war. Okay, so they signed off on an expansive power on part of Lincoln and the federal government to act forcefully during the Civil War. Ex parte Milligan is a case that was decided just after the war ended, in which the so-called open court rule was laid down. You could not try someone before a military tribunal if the civilian courts were open in that same area or that same state, which was a decision that was taken in some quarters, apparently, as declaring military reconstruction to be unconstitutional. The Reconstruction Acts were then pushed through. Okay. The state of Mississippi attempted to sue President Andrew Johnson to prevent him from enforcing the Reconstruction Acts, which is the matter at hand in the case of Mississippi versus Johnson. Okay. Radical Republicans were, of course, suspicious of Johnson, and so they moved to impeach him, but he barely survived being removed from office. We do discuss all the instances of impeachment: Johnson, Richard Nixon, Clinton, and 2 attempts against Donald Trump, 5 in all. No president was ever removed. Nixon, of course, quit, or else he more than likely might well have been removed. But the procedure has been used officially 4 times. It was just underway in committees of Congress when Nixon decided to resign and never got to the floor of the Senate. Okay. So that one was cut short by Nixon's resignation. The other 4 instances, Andrew Johnson, Clinton, and 2 against Trump. Okay. The trial went ahead, but presidents were not removed. In the second attempt against Trump, of course, the procedure did not take place until after he had left office. The point was to try to render him ineligible to run for office, run for president again. As we know, that was not successful, and he has now just begun his second term. And we finish these notes up with some aspects of the separation of powers between president and Congress, the incompatibility and ineligibility clauses. You cannot appoint a sitting member of Congress to a position in the federal government. You cannot take an action. There have been a couple actions where an individual's salary had to be cut to render that individual eligible for a position in the federal government. Well, the veto provisions, veto and pocket veto, the pardon power, the appointment and confirmation power, of course, is shared between the president and the Senate. And then there's the matter of impeachment and removal, and the issue of enumerated versus the implied powers. Okay. So many issues that come up with regard to the separation of powers between president and Congress, and so we raise those considerations to kick off our consideration of executive power, which will continue with 2 more sets of lecture notes next week. Lectures 7 and 8, we have only lecture 6 on the syllabus for this week. Quiz on Thursday, 2 cases to look at from the textbook, excerpts and a little bit of discussion. Multiple opinions in each case, the Korematsu case and the steel seizure case, and we'll take a quiz on that, available all day Thursday for 24 hours. 10 items, 2 points each. You have 10 minutes once you begin the quiz. So we start on executive power, and we will finish that up and say a few words about the class notes for lectures 7 and 8 when we speak to you again about a week from now at this time. Take it easy, study hard. Good luck on the quiz.